I guess it was a couple of days ago, Governor McCrory signed this big old deal, state broadband plan. And, Don and I sort of looked at each other and said, I kind of think I know what that is and so forth. But instead of guessing about it, we've asked to come in, and they've kindly done so. Keith Werner, he is the head of the state you tell me, Keith.
I am the state CIO and head of the Department of Information Technology.
Okay, so CIO meaning Chief Information Officer.
Exactly.
Yes, sir.
And then Jeff Sural, and you're head of?
The Broadband Infrastructure Office, and we work for Keith.
These are two big-time tech geeks, right, is what we're saying here, right? Or you guys said the bow tie boys, so I got to explain to our audience, they look awfully dapper this morning. Yeah. And
we didn't realize it was radio.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Okay, well, they look great. Okay.
We didn't swear. I thought nothing. It's radio. But I was corrected. Yeah.
Make sure we get the clothing requirements to Chef Sheriff. Okay. All right, Keith, now, how long have you been with the state?
I've been with the state for 3.5 years as a state employee and 2 years prior to that as a contractor.
As a contractor, so you're in the private sector?
Yes, sir. I spent 20 years in the private sector, largely supporting state government, and specifically the state of North Carolina. As a vendor.
All right. Tell me about the transition from being in the private sector to you come to the state of North Carolina. And I remember at the time Governor McCrory kind of making a big deal out of how government's broken. We've got a mess in IT. What did you find when you were full-time state employee?
I think I would echo what Governor McCrory found. I think, Rick, the most telling statistic that we heard was that 74% of the IT projects were either over budget or behind schedule or both. And I think that encapsulates kind of the situation we had as the state of North Carolina pretty succinctly. But state IT professionals were scattered throughout the state. There was little aggregation of buying power, which led to 1,000 ill-defined systems that don't work together. So we found just a mirage of issues with state government IT and how it's managed.
So it would be like if you worked at a company, and tell me if I got this right. Let's say you worked in a company and the accounting department had their own word processing accounting thing, and then you go over to the maintenance department and they had a whole different system. And then the administration office had a whole different system, and none of this stuff was coordinated. Is that basically right?
Absolutely, Rick. It was so siloed that IT was really managed at an agency-specific level. Mm-hmm. So there was no enterprise focus on how the state was managing IT or how we were going to strategically look at IT moving forward. So you think about the efficiencies gained from looking at IT from an enterprise perspective, the buying power that we could create by consolidating contracts and looking at contracts at an enterprise level. Those are just a couple of the areas that we can gain great efficiencies in IT for the state.
Well, the governor's been in office a couple of years now. Has that happened? Has the taxpayers actually saved a buck or two? Because now, instead of having all these little itty bitty contractors, one big old contract for the state, and does that equate to savings for the taxpayer?
It does in several different areas. Data centers, for example, the way we manage our websites are another great example. Yeah. I think when we first got in office, Governor McCrory first got in office, all of our websites look different, right?
They sure did.
you know from experience. You know from experience.
Yeah, I do.
So we've actually had an opportunity to look at and create a project centered around that web experience for our citizens. And I think the statistics speak for themselves. The web traffic has increased by 2/3, 68% to be exact.
Wow.
Mobile phone traffic has increased 171%, and tablet traffic has increased 135%. So statistics show that visitors are indeed more engaged with our websites.
You know what, Keith, I think as a taxpayer, people might be surprised and really concerned and frustrated to hear that had been allowed to happen year after year after year. So essentially, if you talk to a person who has an interaction with state government, you are likely to hear the story that a lot of people have had. They've gone to one agency to try to do something, and they've maybe gotten good service, but that person says, well, gee, I'm really sorry, I can't take care of the whole situation for you because the other part of it is in some other department, and our computers don't talk to one another. So you guys have worked on changing that and bringing that all together.
Absolutely. It's about citizen engagement. Governor McCrory hit it right. When he first got in office, his famous quote was, this should be as easy as checking the smartphone, checking the scores on your smartphone or shopping online. And that's really our visioning statement moving forward is it's about citizen engagement. And how do we do that well?
And when you're talking about a state government, I mean, it's a huge operation for all of the things that are going on. And so you would kind of think and maybe hope that, for example, if you guys are out buying things, whether it's software or hardware, that kind of we would presume you're assessing exactly what the needs are and looking at the different options and all that. And then we cross our fingers as taxpayers and say, gee, I hope they buy the right stuff. I hope it works and does, and performs as advertised. But in order to make sure of that, you've come up with an idea that I just think is incredible. And it's almost like a try it before you buy it thing. And now the state is being recognized nationally for this whole effort. Tell people about try it before you buy it.
Well, I want to give all credit to Governor McCrory. His vision of creating the North Carolina Innovation Center, or iCenter as we call it, and it's really a proving ground for technology solutions. And it's similar to what you would do in your personal life. It's a try before you buy approach, as you mentioned, and testing technology solutions before the state makes an investment. And, I'll give you one recent success story coming through the Innovation Center. We saved taxpayers about $5 million by testing and implementing a new computer system for the North Carolina Division of Marine Fisheries. They issue and sell commercial fishing licenses and issue permits. So just by us looking at this particular technology, evaluating that technology against other solutions, we were able to save the state $5 million.
So when you do that, I mean, have you had occasions then when you tried something and you said, gee, I'm glad we tried it because it doesn't work?
Absolutely, and that should be the goal. That should be the goal of the Innovation Center is to prove things good or bad. And, failure should be a part of innovation, and that's a critical piece.
I think, to get this down to, an individual level, I was so elated when, Donna was like, you got to get the car inspected, and so forth. And I went and got the car inspected and had a day or two left and so forth. And then I was like, well, wait a minute, I think I can do this online. And so I got my, whatever I was supposed to do with DMV, got it online and so forth. And, she's hovering over me and said, did you get it done? And I said, yes, babe, it's right here. I'm good to go.
And I said, let me see.
And so forth.
I know, I'm a wife. What can I say?
And, so anyways, it's like, okay, this is great. One, got me out of hot water. Two, I didn't have to go down to the DMV to do it like I had always had to do it. And then it kind of hit me as like, well, wait a minute. If I'm Joe taxpayer, maybe I don't have to pay for all these cotton-picking DMV offices. If more of this stuff goes to, as you said, or as the governor has said a bunch, is do it on your smartphone instead of going into the office. Now, that's not to say you're always going to need offices for certain things that you get from the state, but my goodness, if they could, if I'm out in say Rowan County, maybe that erases the need for a Rowan County office for this sort of thing. Am I dreaming, or is that an actuality that could happen down the road?
Yeah, I think it really fundamentally comes back to online versus inline, right? And
yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way, but
I certainly don't want to speak for Secretary Tennyson at DOT, who runs our DMV operations, and
to refute everything, right?
You can have him in tomorrow. I think our goal is to make sure that we are offering that as an option for our citizens, that they can do it online and do that, from the comfort of their own homes. And actually, DMV, just to speak for them, they've introduced kiosks into some of the motor vehicle offices as well, so that you don't have to go through all the different lines to get something done. You can go to actual kiosk and work through that entire workflow.
So now that we're all trying to, individually and in private business, and now at the state, trying to get this whole online thing together and get the efficiencies going and everybody being able to be the most productive as possible through software and technology. There's another piece of this that the state has become really interested in. And there was this big announcement a couple of days ago about the state's broadband plan. So as Rick mentioned, we're talking and we said, well, kind of think we know what broadband is. We're going to get into more detail, but Jeff, can you explain to us exactly when we say broadband, what do you really mean?
Yeah.
So when we say broadband, we really mean high-speed internet and high-speed internet access. So that's the more colloquial term.
Well, when Donna and I lived in Hillsborough, we had 56K, I think. We had dial-up
like
and so forth. Mm-hmm. Is that broadband?
Well, under some people's definitions, it might be, but no. Actually, what we're talking about when we talk about broadband is looking at the FCC's threshold speeds, which are 25 megabits per second download speeds, 3 megabits per second upload speeds. So some pretty fast speeds. I mean, that's a little much for some people, but basically you're streaming or downloading a movie within seconds rather than waiting minutes for it to download.
All right, we're going to get into the more details of the state's broadband plan and why it's important to you next. And you're listening to You Don't Say with Rick and Donna Martinez here on News Radio 680 WPTF.
News Radio 680 WPTF.
I used to bite my tongue and hold my breath, scared to rock the boat.
Well, I'm sure you were like me when you found out that North Carolina has a state broadband plan. You were like, finally, we've got one.
That's great. Now what is that?
Now, what exactly does it mean?
Yeah, who's paying for that? What's
well,
the
we've
deal?
got two experts. Keith Werner is the state CIO, Chief Information Officer, and Jeff Sural. He's head of the broadband division. This is the guy who's on the hook of getting this plan, in place and so forth. And let me start with something that was a little bit confusing to me. When I read this plan and stuff in the paper and went on the website and I see this screaming thing here about North Carolina is above the national average with 93% deployment on broadband. And I said, well, if we were at 93%, why do we need a big old plan? Isn't it already happening? And then I see this other statistic that as far as our adoption rate, it's 37%. So, okay, all right, Jeff, earn your money here.
Yeah,
What is the difference and why is it significant?
Right. Well, the 93% deployment rate is based on provider, that's internet service provider, reports to the FCC. So they fill out a form and say this is how many subscribers we have across the state. The other statistic is actually North Carolina is a 16% adoption rate. So that means how many people are actually subscribing at that threshold rate that I mentioned. I mean, how many are picking up and actually paying for higher speed internet access. And it's important because the state has done very well, and all credit to Governor McCrory to have some vision to try to connect all the state and make sure that we have the infrastructure available. The internet is pervasive in all of our lives. It affects workforce development, economic development, education, and so when we look at the adoption rates being low, we certainly want we want to engage citizenry, and just like Keith had said, we want people to go online instead of inline, and to do that, they need to appreciate the benefits that online services provide.
So does this mean that the goal here is to try to make sure that every person in North Carolina, if they want it, has access to kind of a high-speed internet, whether it's for their personal computer or a business computer or something like that?
Yes.
Is that the bottom line here?
That's the bottom line. Governor McCrory had a vision for North Carolina that we would be a gig state, meaning that we would have high-speed internet access pervasive through the state so that we're competing with the likes of Silicon Valley in California and the tech sector in Boston. This is a plan that sets out recommendations for both elected officials at the General Assembly level and state level, and also at the local level, on how that they can improve their communities and the infrastructure in their communities.
Well, that sounds real good, but I'm fat and happy in Wake County. I got my something megabit. Why the heck do I care about whether or not they have it in Rowan County, and because I'm sitting here thinking now I got to pay for a state broadband office and so forth.
Yeah.
So so what's the benefit to me as somebody who's already set?
Well, I think the benefit is that North Carolina succeeds as a whole. So we do have folks in Rowan County who lack access, and they care. And Rowan County, of course, wants to increase or enhance the economic development opportunities in their county. And so the internet, just like our roadways were, building the roadways over the last 100 years, this is important for those communities.
So when you say they lack access, are you saying that there are companies who provide the service, like, we choose a company and we pay them a monthly fee to give us our internet service? Are you saying that there are areas of North Carolina that do not have companies who want to serve them?
They either don't have companies that want to serve them, or the companies that are serving them have inadequate infrastructure for current needs.
Okay, so then the state is going to step in and do what?
Well, I think governments have a role in creating environments or an ecosystem where there's competition. So we're looking at state policies and laws that would facilitate greater competition. In those areas where you lack competition, you're going to lack affordability and innovation. So we need to look at other models. And that's where communities can get together and decide based on what assets they have. They might own telephone poles or electric poles if they're electric city. They might own right-of-ways. Can they help that provider in their area develop a pathway to deploy the infrastructure, meaning digging up the side of the road and putting in new infrastructure like fiber optic cables that are going to carry and be able to hold the bandwidth for high-speed internet access.
So does that mean that you all have gone to the private companies and said, look, we know you're serving Wake County and Mecklenburg County, and you got all sorts of customers there, and people are buying your service and people are happy. But over here in a more rural area, you're not serving that area. So why not? Is that the question you're asking? Why not?
It's the question we're asking, and based on some of the responses. And, of course, we surveyed 3,500 local and state officials. We talked to over 60 experts. We held 24 listening sessions. We talked to the providers. For a lot of the providers, it's a business case. We just can't get the return on our investment.
Because they're in the business to make money.
Yeah,
that's what business is. Yeah.
Exactly, and we're all for that. One of the biggest things for North Carolina that we have going for us is a business-friendly environment, and we have a growing economy. People are moving in. That spurs competition. That spurs economic development for those providers. So they'll want to move out. We have new entrants in the marketplace, like Google Fiber coming into Wake County and the Triangle and into Mecklenburg County. So we want to be that state that attracts those folks. There are areas of our state, though, admittedly, that aren't attracting those types of providers, and that's because they're sparsely populated. So we want to set out recommendations for them. You mentioned budget, and for the most part, this plan is budget neutral. What does
that mean? What does budget neutral mean in the real
So
world?
we're not asking the taxpayers to pay for any of the efforts or recommendations here. What we want to do is there's a number of federal and state grants, and there's also private foundations out there that want to participate or aid in helping communities plan and helping providers deploy. So I want to leverage all of those funds before coming back to ask the taxpayers for any money. I think we need to leverage the existing funds that are out there and use them wisely.
Now, when I heard you say, infrastructure and so forth. So let's see if I got this right. So if it's important that Rowan County or Catawba County or any of these counties have this high-speed internet so that they can attract companies, because I'd love to have Rick's rocket parts, but most of my business is in California, and so I need a big internet connection in order to to get everything right, because I've got drawings and so forth. Is that basically what you're talking about on the economic side?
That's certainly part of it. The other part of it is lifestyle for their employees. So, for example, in Ashe County, where the General Electric has a large aircraft engine manufacturing plant, they wanted to increase the size of that plant, and they were going to bring in 400 highly paid employees. But those employees have families, and they're not going to move to Ashe County if their sons and daughters who are in middle and high school can't have access or don't have access to the internet. So that was an important thing for that community, and that's something that community had to help and assist with the local providers, and that was a telephone co-op in that case.
As we talk about plans like this, I would predict that there are some people listening and they're saying, well, wait a second, does that mean the state's stepping into something that's really a private sector issue and all that? Are we talking about carrots here or sticks here? Is the state going to start putting on rules and regulations to these companies? And I'm just, something like, well, gee, if you want to operate in that really lucrative Wake County market, you're going to have to do X, Y, Z over in this other area of the state. Are you going to do the stick approach, or is this about carrots, saying we're going to try to improve things for you so that you'll want to come here? This
is about carrots. So we in North Carolina, we don't regulate the broadband businesses, that part of the business. So there are some FCC regulations that, of course, those companies abide by. But for the most part, we want to create incentives for those providers to build out, so to lower their construction costs in certain communities so that they have the incentive to build out to sparsely populated areas. That's what we want to do in North Carolina.
Is there an education component to this?
Big education component. So North Carolina leads the nation in schools connected to fiber. Almost 98% of all of our schools, and in the next couple of years, 100% of all of our schools will have a dedicated high-speed internet infrastructure to each of the schools. That's not being done anywhere else in the country. Of course, Governor McCrory has been a huge proponent of this and pushing this. We'll have Wi-Fi access in all of our classroums by the end of 2018.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
Yeah, it is. But
there's good and bad to that.
Yes,
Well, ask any parent, ask any teacher.
That's why we have filters, and that's why we have security.
This is where Big Brother's really good for us here.
Yeah, no, but it is important to set our state apart and to give our school kids every advantage possible when they enter the 21st century workforce.
Keith, when it comes to things like trying to incent business to move into areas that may not be attractive because of their location or for whatever reason, I'm presuming then that you must have some sort of a close relationship with the folks who are out, in the job recruiting business for the state. This has got to be a key thing for them.
Absolutely. 100%. I know Jeff's team works very closely with the vendor community and those businesses and making sure that they have the infrastructure needed to, run their business, but also the folks that are looking to come into those areas, building out that plan for them. So
yeah, I would think that commerce people and the Partnership for Economic Development, that they must be really interested in what you're doing here.
Very interested, and we had discussions with them. We had discussions with folks like Red Hat and SAS and those great companies about what their needs were for employees or folks coming on board.
We have about a minute or so, but you've got these, at least in my reading, very reasonable goals, and you've pretty much spells out what the benefits are to everybody in North Carolina. When do you want to have this baby, in place?
Well, we'd like to have 100% access if people so choose. North Carolinians are an independent sort of folk, and we appreciate that. But if they want to access the internet, we hope to have that completed by 2021. That's our goal.
Boy, that's quick.
Yeah. Well, we have, as you saw some of the statistics, we're pretty good now. We've got a good news story. We don't have a perfect one. We still have 750,000 people without access itself. So those are the toughest nuts to crack, to be honest.
All right. Jeff Sural, he is head of the North Carolina Broadband Infrastructure Office, and Keith Werner, he is the state's top geek. He has chief information.
The bow tie boys here. They look really nice, folks.
Yeah, they're wearing bow ties, guys. So you kind of know where
guys,
that's
thank
going.
you. Really appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.
That's right. And coming up next, Bill LeMay will be here, and of course followed by
Clark Howard.
Save money, and that's how you do it. Save money or less, whatever he does, and so forth. and then, of course, Scott Brigham with the Triangles Afternoon News. So we'll be back tomorrow, folks.
Breaking news, traffic, weather.